My friends, I want to remind you today of a powerful, unshakable truth. God is not limited by circumstances, time, or human expectations. He is not bound by the challenges that seem insurmountable in our eyes. When we face difficulties, when the road ahead looks impossible, we must remember that nothing is beyond His reach. Throughout history, we have seen Him part the seas, bring down walls, heal the sick, and raise the dead. He has moved in ways that defy logic, bringing victory where there was only defeat, hope where there was only despair, and life where there was only death. And what He has done before, He can do again. You may be facing an obstacle today that seems too big. You may feel like the weight of the world is pressing down on you. But let me tell you something. God is greater. He is greater than the financial struggles that keep you up at night. He is greater than the sickness that tries to steal your strength. He is greater than the failures of the past that whisper lies about your future. There is nothing too hard for Him. He spoke the universe into existence. He set the stars in place and calls them by name. He formed you, crafted you, and placed within you a divine purpose. Do you think He would create you and then leave you without a way forward? No. He is the God who makes a way when there seems to be no way. But here's the key. You must trust Him. You must believe that He is who He says He is. When He says He is your provider, He will provide. When He says He is your healer, He will heal. When He says He will never leave you nor forsake you, He means it. So do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. Do not allow fear or doubt to take root in your heart. Stand firm in faith, knowing that the same God who raised Lazarus, who calmed the storm, and who rolled away the stone is the same God who is working in your life right now. Lift your eyes, hold on to His promises, and walk forward in confidence, because with Him all things are possible. God is unlimited in power. He is not confined by human logic, nor is He constrained by the boundaries of the natural world. What we call impossible is merely an opportunity for Him to reveal His glory. When we look around at the world, we see limits in strength, in knowledge, in resources. But God has no limits. He is infinite in wisdom, boundless in might, and unshakable in authority. There is no force, no power, and no opposition that can stand against Him. From the very beginning, His power has been on full display. When the earth was formless and void, and darkness covered the deep, He simply spoke, and light burst forth. He commanded, and the heavens stretched out. He breathed life into dust, and humanity was formed. He established the laws of nature, set the sun in the sky, and told the ocean where its waves must stop. And even now, all creation obeys Him, for He holds the universe in His hands. Yet despite all this evidence of His might, how often do we limit Him in our thinking? How often do we assume that our problems are too complex, our mountains too high, or our situations too far gone for Him to intervene? We measure power by human standards, forgetting that He is the one who spoke the world into existence. If He can create galaxies with a word, why would He not be able to move in our lives? Consider Abraham and Sarah, who were well beyond the years of bearing children. By all natural reasoning, their hope for a son was lost. But God had already declared His promise, and when Sarah laughed in doubt, He responded with a question that still echoes through the ages. Is anything too hard for the Lord? And in due time, despite every human limitation, Isaac was born, because what is impossible for man is possible with God. Think about Moses standing before the Red Sea with an entire nation behind him and Pharaoh's army closing in. To the natural eye, it was a hopeless situation. There was no way out. But God does not need a visible path to create one. With a single command, the waters parted and His people walked across on dry ground. Time and time again, Scripture shows us that nothing can withstand His power. The walls of Jericho fell without a single weapon striking them. The sun stood still in the sky when Joshua prayed. The giant Goliath was no match for a shepherd boy with faith. A fiery furnace could not consume 3 men who trusted in Him. The mouths of lions were shut before Daniel, and time and again, sickness, disease, blindness, and even death bowed before His authority. But His power is not just for the pages of history. It is alive and active today. He is still healing, still providing, still opening doors, still breaking chains, and still performing miracles. He is not distant or indifferent to what you are facing. He knows your struggles, your fears, and the burdens that weigh you down. And He is more than able to meet every need. The question is not whether he is powerful enough to move in your life. The question is whether you believe he can. Faith is the bridge between our circumstances and his limitless power. Too often we place our confidence in what we see, in what we hear, in what we understand. But faith calls us to look beyond the natural and trust in the supernatural. God does not require perfect conditions to work. He is not limited by medical reports, financial downturns, or broken relationships. Where there is lack, he brings abundance. Where there is sickness, he brings healing. Where there is despair, he brings hope. He is not waiting for things to improve before he steps in. He is waiting for hearts that believe he is able. No matter how impossible your situation seems, he is greater. No matter how far gone things appear, he can restore. No matter how heavy the burden, he can lift it. He has never encountered a problem too big for his power or a challenge too great for his wisdom. His strength never diminishes, his authority never weakens, and his power never fails. God has a history of miraculous works. From the beginning of time, his power has been displayed in ways that defy human understanding. When people were at the end of their resources, when there was no possible way forward, he stepped in and did the impossible. His works are not just stories from the past, they are testimonies of his faithfulness, records of his unchanging nature, and proof that he is the same yesterday, today, and forever. In the days of Noah, when the world was filled with corruption, God provided a way of salvation through the ark. Though the earth was destined for destruction, he preserved those who trusted in him. It was not the strength of Noah that saved him, but the power of God working through obedience. When Abraham and Sarah were beyond childbearing age, when every natural law said they could not conceive, God fulfilled his promise and gave them a son. Against all odds, Isaac was born, proving that his word never fails. When his people were enslaved in Egypt, oppressed by a ruler who would not let them go, he displayed his might through signs and wonders. He turned water into blood, sent plagues that no human power could stop, and parted the Red Sea, making a way where there was none. He fed them with manna in the wilderness, caused water to flow from a rock, and led them with a pillar of fire by night and a cloud by day. His miracles were not just acts of power, they were acts of love, showing his people that he was with them. As they entered the promised land, they encountered Jericho, a city with walls so strong that no army could penetrate them. But he does not need weapons or armies to bring victory. With nothing but the sound of a trumpet and the obedience of his people, the walls came crashing down. Time and time again, he demonstrated that victory does not come by human strength, but by his hand alone. Elijah stood on Mount Carmel against 450 prophets of Baal. The odds were against him, but God does not require a majority to show his power. When Elijah called upon him, fire fell from heaven, consuming the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and even the water in the trench. It was a declaration to all that there is only one true God, and he alone reigns. When a widow was down to her last bit of oil and flour, preparing to make one final meal before she and her son died of hunger, he multiplied what she had. What seemed too little in human eyes became more than enough in his hands. The same God who provided for her is still providing today. The miracles did not stop in the Old Testament. When Jesus walked the earth, he healed the sick, gave sight to the blind, made the lame walk, and cast out demons with a word. He fed thousands with just a few loaves and fish, showing that lack is no match for his provision. He calmed storms with his voice, proving that even nature submits to his authority. And when Lazarus had been in the tomb for 4 days, when hope was gone and death had claimed its victory, he simply spoke and life returned. His greatest miracle was the resurrection. The enemy thought he had won, that the cross was the end, but the grave could not hold him. He rose in victory, breaking the power of sin and death forever. It was the ultimate demonstration that nothing is impossible for him. His works were not confined to the pages of Scripture. Even today, testimonies of healing, restoration, and divine intervention continue to reveal his power. Those who were lost in darkness have been set free. Those who had no hope have found new life. He is still working miracles, still changing lives, and still proving that He is the same God who parted the seas, tore down walls, and raised the dead. God is greater than any challenge. No matter how overwhelming a situation may seem, no matter how impossible the circumstances appear, He is bigger. He is not intimidated by the size of the mountain in front of you, nor is He shaken by the storms that rage around you. Every battle, every trial, and every obstacle that tries to stand in your way is already under His authority. He reigns above all things, and nothing can challenge His power. When the Israelites stood before the Red Sea with the Egyptian army closing in behind them, they saw no way out. Fear gripped them, and they cried out in despair. But He was not concerned about the water before them or the enemy behind them. He had already made a way before they even knew they needed one. With a mighty wind, He parted the sea, turning an impassable barrier into a dry path of deliverance. What seemed like certain defeat became a testimony of His greatness. David stood before Goliath, a shepherd boy facing a giant warrior. To everyone watching, the outcome was clear. David was too small, too weak, too unprepared, but he does not need the strength of man to accomplish His purposes. David did not fight with the weapons of the world. He fought with faith in the one who is greater, and with a single stone, guided by divine power, the giant fell. The battle was never about David's ability, but about his greatness. When 3 Hebrew men were thrown into a fiery furnace for refusing to bow to an idol, it seemed like the end. The flames were so intense that even the guards who threw them in were consumed. But fire has no power over those under His protection. The king looked into the furnace and saw not 3 men, but 4, walking unharmed in the flames. He was with them in the fire, proving that no heat, no pressure, and no attack of the enemy can overcome those who trust in Him. Daniel was thrown into a den of hungry lions, sentenced to death for his faith. By all human reasoning, there was no way to survive. But He is greater than any enemy. That night He shut the mouths of the lions, and Daniel emerged without a single wound. What was meant for destruction became another declaration of His power. When Jesus and His disciples were in a boat, a fierce storm arose. The winds howled, the waves crashed, and fear filled their hearts. But He was in the boat with them, asleep, undisturbed by the storm. When they woke Him in fear, He simply spoke, and the wind and waves obeyed. Nature itself bows before Him. What seemed like a moment of disaster became another revelation of His authority. No sickness is beyond His healing. The woman with the issue of blood had suffered for 12 years, spending all she had on doctors, yet nothing changed. But one touch of His garment, one moment in His presence, and she was healed completely. The blind received sight, the lame walked, the lepers were cleansed, and demons fled at His command. There is no disease, no affliction, and no condition that is greater than His power. No bondage is too strong for His deliverance. The man possessed by a legion of demons lived in torment, isolated and beyond hope. But the moment he stepped onto the shore, the demons trembled. With just a word, they were cast out, and the man was set free. Chains, addictions, and oppression are no match for His authority. No need is beyond His provision. Thousands followed Him into the wilderness, and there was no food to feed them. But He is not limited by what is available. With just 5 loaves and 2 fish, He multiplied what little they had until every person was satisfied. Where there is lack, He brings abundance. No sin is too great for His forgiveness. The thief on the cross was moments away from death, guilty and undeserving of mercy. Yet, with one cry for salvation, he was received into paradise. His grace is greater than any past mistake, and His love reaches beyond every failure. There is nothing that can stand against Him. No enemy, no trial, no circumstance is greater than His power. He is the one who turns defeat into victory, impossibility into reality, and brokenness into restoration. Whatever stands before you today is already under His feet. Faith is the key to experiencing His power. It is not enough to know that He is all-powerful. We must believe it in our hearts and trust Him in every situation. Throughout history, He has moved mightily in the lives of those who have placed their confidence in Him. Faith is not merely acknowledging that He exists. It is living with the assurance that He will do what He has promised. It is stepping forward when the path is unclear, trusting when the answers have not yet come, and believing even when circumstances seem to suggest otherwise. Abraham was called to leave everything familiar, to walk away from his homeland, his security, and his plans, simply because he told him to. There was no roadmap, no detailed explanation, only a promise. And because Abraham believed, he counted it as righteousness. When the time came for Isaac to be sacrificed, Abraham's faith did not waver. He knew that even if Isaac were taken, he was able to raise him back to life. It was faith that carried Abraham forward, and it was faith that allowed him to experience his miraculous provision. When the Israelites stood at the edge of the promised land, they saw giants inhabiting the land he had promised to them. 10 spies saw obstacles too great to overcome, but Joshua and Caleb saw victory through faith. They believed that he was greater than the opposition before them. But the people chose fear over faith. Because of their unbelief, they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, missing out on the blessing that was already prepared for them. Faith would have led them into the land immediately, but doubt delayed what was meant to be theirs. When Naaman, the commander of the Syrian army, sought healing from leprosy, he was told to wash in the Jordan River 7 times. At first, he resisted. It seemed too simple, too ordinary. But when he finally obeyed in faith, his skin was restored. His healing did not come from the river itself, but from trusting the one who had given the instruction. Many times the answer we seek requires simple obedience, even when it does not make sense. Faith is choosing to trust him over our own understanding. The woman with the issue of blood had suffered for 12 years. Doctors had failed her, and her condition had only grown worse. But when she heard about Jesus, faith arose within her. She did not need an invitation, a ceremony, or a guarantee. She simply believed that if she could touch even the hem of his garment, she would be healed. Pushing through the crowd, she reached out, and in an instant, her suffering was over. Her faith made her whole, and he declared that her belief had brought the miracle to pass. Blind Bartimaeus sat by the roadside as Jesus passed by. He had no way of knowing if this was his only chance, but he refused to stay silent. He cried out with all his might, calling on the one who could change his life forever. And when others tried to silence him, he cried out even louder. His faith would not be discouraged, and because he believed, his sight was restored. Faith does not give up in the face of opposition. It presses forward, knowing that he is able. Peter walked on water because of faith. When Jesus called him out of the boat, he stepped forward not because the water changed, but because he trusted in the one who called him. As long as his eyes were fixed on Jesus, he remained above the waves. But the moment he looked at the storm instead of his Savior, fear took over and he began to sink. The lesson is clear. Faith keeps us steady, but doubt pulls us down. The centurion understood faith in a way that amazed even Jesus. He believed that Jesus did not need to come to his home to heal his servant. He understood that his word alone had the power to bring healing. With complete confidence, he said, "Just say the word and my servant will be healed." And because of his faith, it was done. Faith unlocks the miraculous. It is the bridge between the natural and the supernatural, between what we see and what he has promised. It was faith that caused the walls of Jericho to fall. Faith that turned 5 loaves and 2 fish into a feast for thousands. Faith that raised the dead, and faith that continues to move mountains today. When we choose to believe, when we stand firm on his word, we position ourselves to receive what he has already prepared. Faith does not wait for signs. It moves forward in expectation, knowing that he is faithful to do what he has promised. God is actively working in your life today. His power did not fade after the pages of Scripture were written, nor did his miracles cease when the last apostle left the earth. The same God who spoke the universe into existence, who parted seas, who healed the sick, and who raised the dead, is the same God who is moving in the lives of his people right now. He is not distant, nor is he indifferent to what you are facing. Every moment he is working behind the scenes, orchestrating events, opening doors, and making a way where there seems to be none. There are times when his work is obvious, when prayers are answered in ways that leave no doubt, when provision comes at just the right moment, or when healing occurs in a way that defies medical explanation. But there are also times when it seems like nothing is happening. The silence can be discouraging, and the waiting can test even the strongest faith. Yet he is always at work, even when we cannot see it. What appears to be a delay is often preparation. What seems like a closed door is often protection. Joseph did not see the full picture when he was thrown into a pit by his brothers, sold into slavery, and imprisoned for a crime he did not commit. From his perspective, it may have looked like God was absent. But he was working all along, positioning Joseph for a purpose far greater than he could have imagined. Every hardship was leading him to a place of influence where he would save an entire nation from famine. Looking back, it became clear God had never abandoned him. He was guiding him the entire time. The same is true today. When things do not make sense, when prayers seem unanswered, when the road ahead looks uncertain, he is still moving. He is aligning the right people, the right opportunities, and the right timing to bring about his perfect plan. The process may be difficult, but the promise remains. He is working in the lives of those who trust him. He is still healing bodies, restoring families, and breaking chains of addiction. There are testimonies of people who were given no hope by doctors, yet they stand healed today. Marriages that seemed beyond repair have been restored. Lives that were headed toward destruction have been transformed. These are not coincidences. They are the evidence of his power still at work. He is working in the details of your life in ways both great and small. That unexpected provision when you needed it most, that moment of encouragement when you were ready to give up, that door that opened when you thought all opportunities were lost. These are not random events. He is leading, guiding, and providing exactly what you need at exactly the right time. His work is not limited to one kind of miracle. Sometimes he moves suddenly, turning everything around in an instant. Other times he works gradually, step by step, preparing the way before you. Whether his power is revealed in a moment or over time, the truth remains the same. He is working. Faith is the key to recognizing his hand in your life. When we trust him, we begin to see his fingerprints in every situation. What once seemed like accidents or luck become clear signs of his presence. The more we acknowledge his work, the more we recognize that he has been there all along, guiding every step. There is no situation too small for his attention and no problem too big for his power. He is not just the God of the past, he is the God of today, and he is moving right now. Even when the circumstances seem unchanged, even when the breakthrough has not yet come, he is still working. His power has not diminished, and his promises remain. He is always faithful, and his hand is always at work in the lives of those who trust in him. No matter where you are, no matter what you face, remember this. God can do anything. His power has no limits, his authority has no boundaries, and his love has no end. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. What he has done before, he can do again. The miracles of the past were not just for history. They are reminders of what he is still doing in the present. If he parted the seas for his people, he can make a way for you. If he brought down giants with a single stone, he can bring victory in your battles. If he shut the mouths of lions, walked through the fire, healed the sick, and raised the dead, then there is nothing in your life that is beyond his reach. But the key is faith. Will you trust him when the answer is not yet clear? Will you believe when the situation looks impossible? Will you stand firm knowing that he is working even when you cannot see it? He is not distant, he is near. He is not silent, he is speaking. He is not powerless, he is still moving. So hold on to his promises. Walk in faith knowing that he is able. Stand firm knowing that he is in control. And never forget, there is nothing too hard for him, nothing beyond his power, and nothing that he cannot do. Because with God, all things are possible.